The amber glow of the desk lamp cast Professor Emma Caldwell's shadow against the archive's stone walls. Outside, rain pattered against the windows of Heidelberg University's historical archives, where she had been working for nearly 16 hours straight. Her colleagues had long since departed, leaving her alone with the musty scent of leather-bound volumes and the persistent scratch of her pen against paper. For 3 years, Emma had dedicated herself to uncovering the untold aspects of Arthur Schopenhauer's philosophy, particularly his notorious views on women. As a philosophy professor specializing in 19th-century German thought, she had always been troubled by the disconnect between Schopenhauer's brilliant insights on human suffering and his seemingly irrational contempt for the female intellect. "There has to be more to this story," she whispered to herself, carefully turning another brittle page of the philosopher's personal journal, a document only recently discovered in a private collection and barely catalogued. Her eyes widened as she translated the faded German script. October 15, 1844. I have maintained publicly that women exist merely for the propagation of the species, lacking depth of understanding. Yet after today's conversation with Elise, I question whether my own understanding is as profound as I have claimed. Her intuitive grasp of suffering as a unifying human experience surpasses my systematic approach. This I cannot acknowledge to anyone, least of all my colleagues. The woman sees through the veil of Maya in ways my intellect alone cannot penetrate. Emma's hand trembled as she carefully photographed the page. This was extraordinary. Schopenhauer in his private thoughts, acknowledging what appeared to be intellectual respect, perhaps even admiration, for a woman's philosophical insight over. The next several weeks, Emma pieced together references to this mysterious Elise Meyer, a woman absent from all official biographies of Schopenhauer. The journals revealed a complex relationship spanning nearly 15 years, during which Elise challenged the philosopher's thinking on numerous occasions. December 3, 1851. Elise posed a devastating question today. If compassion is, as you claim, the basis of morality, then how can you justify excluding half of humanity from moral consideration? I responded with my usual arguments about women's intellectual limitations, but the words rang hollow, even to my own ears. What if the ability to feel deeply, which I have often dismissed as feminine weakness, is actually the very foundation of the wisdom I seek? This thought disturbs me greatly. Emma discovered that as Schopenhauer aged, his private reflections showed an increasing dissonance between his public pronouncements and private doubts. In one particularly revealing entry from near the end of his life, he wrote, "I have built my reputation on a philosophy that celebrates the will to live while simultaneously condemning its manifestations. I have positioned myself as one who sees clearly while others are deluded. Yet Elise has shown me that my own vision may be the most clouded of all. My inability to reconcile the wisdom I have encountered in her with my public philosophy will likely be my greatest failure, one the world will never know." 3 months later, Emma stood before a packed auditorium at the International Philosophy Symposium in Berlin. The audience comprised the most distinguished scholars in the field, most of them men who had built careers interpreting Schopenhauer's work. "Distinguished colleagues," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "What I present today will challenge everything we thought we knew about Arthur Schopenhauer, not merely his views on women, but the very foundations of his philosophical system." The room buzzed with skepticism as Emma projected translations of the journal entries onto the large screen behind her. Professor Maxwell, the white-haired department head from Oxford and leading Schopenhauer scholar, scoffed audibly. "You expect us to believe that Schopenhauer, who wrote that women are intellectually short-sighted with deficient powers of reasoning, secretly harbored respect for female wisdom? This seems like revisionist history at best, Professor Caldwell." Emma met his gaze evenly. "I expect you to consider the evidence, Professor Maxwell. These journals have been authenticated by 3 independent experts. The handwriting, the paper, the ink, all consistent with Schopenhauer's known personal writings." She advanced to the next slide, a page where Schopenhauer had sketched a diagram showing 2 paths to wisdom: the intellectual path of reason, labeled the male approach, and the intuitive path of direct experience, labeled Elise's way. Beneath it, he had written, Perhaps true wisdom requires both. This is the insight I cannot integrate into my published work without undermining everything I have claimed." The room fell silent. Schopenhauer's shocking truth wasn't about women at all, Emma continued. It was about the limitations of his own philosophical approach. His public disparagement of women may have been his way of dismissing an alternative form of wisdom he encountered but couldn't reconcile with his existing framework, one that threatened the coherence of his life's work. Professor Hiroshi Tanaka from Tokyo University leaned forward. "Are you suggesting, Professor Caldwell, that Schopenhauer recognized that his entire philosophical system was incomplete?" "I'm suggesting more than that," Emma replied. "I believe he came to recognize that his system might be fundamentally flawed precisely because it privileged abstract intellect over lived experience. His inability to acknowledge the wisdom he encountered in Elise became the symbol of his philosophy's greatest weakness." The discussions that followed Emma's presentation continued long into the night at the hotel bar, where scholars debated the implications of her findings. Some dismissed them as irrelevant to Schopenhauer's published work. Others saw them as revolutionary. Professor Maxwell approached her table, 2 glasses of whiskey in hand. He set one before her and sat down, heavily. "Your discovery is unsettling," he admitted after a long silence. "We've built entire schools of thought on what may have been Schopenhauer's deliberate self-deception." Emma accepted the drink with a nod. Perhaps that's the real lesson here. Even the greatest minds can become trapped in their own systems, unable to incorporate new understanding when it threatens their intellectual identity. Maxwell sipped his whiskey thoughtfully. "I've spent 40 years studying Schopenhauer's work. I've published 7 books interpreting his philosophy, and now you tell me he himself questioned its foundations." "Not questioned," Emma corrected, gently. "He knew its limitations. He simply couldn't bear to acknowledge them publicly." "And this Elise Meyer, what happened to her? Why has history lost track of her entirely?" Emma smiled sadly. "That's my next research project. Someone who influenced one of history's great philosophers so profoundly deserves to be more than a footnote in his hidden journals." As the conference concluded days later, Emma received invitations from universities around the world to present her findings. But before embarking on the lecture circuit, she returned to Heidelberg to continue her research. In a small antiquarian bookshop near the university, she discovered a slim volume of poetry published in 1857 under the name E.M. The poems explored themes remarkably similar to Schopenhauer's philosophy, yet with a distinctive perspective that emphasized connection rather than isolation. The bookshop owner, an elderly man with kind eyes, noticed her interest. "Ah, you've found something special there. That belonged to my great-grandmother's collection. Family legend says the author was a friend of the philosopher Schopenhauer, though few believed her at the time." Emma's heart raced as she carefully opened the book's cover. Inside was a handwritten inscription. "To Arthur, who sees the world's pain clearly but has yet to discover its remedy. Perhaps one day you will have the courage to acknowledge that wisdom resides not only in the mind that perceives suffering, but in the heart that transcends it. With enduring friendship, Elise Meyer." Emma purchased the book immediately, holding it close as she walked through the rainy streets of Heidelberg. She had uncovered not just Schopenhauer's shocking truth, his recognition of the limitations of pure intellect, but potentially a missing voice in philosophy's grand conversation. The true revelation wasn't that Schopenhauer had been wrong about women. It was that he had known he was wrong and chose to maintain his flawed philosophy rather than embrace a more complete understanding that might have transformed Western thought. As Emma reached her apartment, she wondered how many other philosophical truths throughout history might similarly be built on foundations of unexamined fear or pride rather than genuine wisdom, and how many silenced voices still waited to be discovered in the margins of history's greatest thinkers.